Hello, and thank you so much for joining the webinar. My name is Maya, and here with me is Deirdre Ryan. Um, actually, the purpose of this webinar is really to discuss treatments in development for chronic pain and how we can benefit from them. So our initial idea was to share our experience with all of you people, but also get from your experience and possibly learn something new so that we can help other people as well. I'll just wait for a few more minutes. Meanwhile, let me ask you something. If you can't hear me well, if the sound is not okay, please send me a message to the chat box that you can see in front of you. Or send a message to Yapo. This is Dani. She's helping us with the organization. And let us know, and we'll take it from there. So when I say Yapo, I'll start with explaining actually who is behind this webinar. As I said, my name is Maya, and I'm representing the FindMeCure Foundation. And I'm really delighted to be together with Deirdre Ryan from Chronic Pain Ireland. And also we have the support of the International Alliance of Patients. YAPO, the International Alliance of Patient Organizations, has started a great initiative trying to bring the patient's voice in front and trying to empower patients through knowledge. And last December, while having their normal campaign, FindMeCure Foundation decided to join. The mission of the foundation is to help people access treatments in development by educating them what clinical trials are and what the benefits and the risks are. And we were really delighted to join the International Alliance of Patient Organizations so that we can spread the word of what we are doing and really share our experience. Chronic Pain Ireland is one of our partners that is really active in trying to help their members. And we decided that creating a webinar focused on treatments and development for people having chronic pain will be something that will help many people, their members, but also other people. So a little bit more about myself. I am currently in Bulgaria when it's pretty much snowy, like in the UK and in Ireland, as I've heard. And actually, the reason I joined and I started FindMeCure was the fact that I had to look for a clinical trial for my own sister. And it was a horrible experience back then. It was like 5 years ago. Though I had more than 10 years of experience in the clinical research industry, this really didn't help me a lot. And this is when I realized that there are many people out there in the situation that I was and my sister, we were. And I wanted to help them find out ways to get easier and faster access to clinical trials. On top of that, in the past couple of years, I fight for the patients' rights by being a part of the foundation, but also by being a part of different global initiatives like the Patient Empowerment Initiative, started by the Alliance of Clinical Research, Excellence and Safety, and being invited to different events, speaking about the patients, how to bring the patient voice, and how to really make patient journey better and easier. And now, as I said, we have Deirdre Ryan. She's from Chronic Pain Ireland, and I will be really delighted to be able to lead this webinar with her. In just a few seconds, I will allow herself to introduce herself, actually. But first, I have a couple of asks for all of you that are attending this webinar. First of all, while having the presentations, I will remove my camera so that we can focus on the slides and on the information that we are providing to you. I will also ask you, since you're on mute, we decided that it's better for all of you, not because we don't want to hear your comments, but just the opposite. We want to hear everyone's comments and feedback and questions. So the best way will be for you to write down your questions and comments in the chat box that you can see in the middle of your screen. And in the end of the webinar, we will have around 10 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes to cover all of your questions. And I will do whatever it takes really to answer as much as possible. If you, however, have any problem during the webinar, please let us know during the webinar by leaving us a message on the chat box. Me, Dani, and Deirdre, we are here to help you out. I hope that you will enjoy that. I will now mute myself and will remove my camera, and I will allow Deirdre to explain more about her background. And thank you, Deirdre, for joining us and really making sure that we will cover these really important topics that are important for patients having chronic pain. Thank you.
Thanks, Maya, and it's a pleasure to be here from snowy Dublin. Thankfully, this is an online event as I'm currently snowed in and have power back, thankfully. So I'm calling in from Dublin in Ireland, and I'm a governing body member of Chronic Pain Ireland. Personally, I live with chronic pain. I've been living with it since 2008, so almost 10 years experience with it now. And similar to what Maya was saying, I really noticed that there was a huge gap both in services and were provided and communicated to patients across the country in Ireland and also across Europe also. So in 2010, I became a member of Chronic Pain Ireland and attended their meetings and got all the information from them about their advocacy work. And last year, I joined the governing body. And as Maya said, my responsibilities for delivering the self-management side of our events and creating the strategy and plans of how we're moving forward as an organisation. I'm also a student psychotherapist. I'm almost pre-accredited, and I see a huge, and all the evidence is there to see the link between the psychological factors of chronic pain and the impact that has on your mental health as well. So I have various interests in chronic pain and obviously living with it as well. So today what I'm going to look at initially is what is chronic pain, what are the definitions, and what's life like with chronic pain. And I know many of you joining us today are Chronic Pain Ireland members or have an interest in this topic, and some of you may be living with it. And I think I must say that my experience may be very different to yours. So I'm just giving an overview of what it could be. Then we're going to look at the prevalence across Ireland, the UK, Europe, and some notes on Australia as well. And then the typical sort of services that are provided in Ireland. So I think I'll be speaking briefly around 10 minutes or so. And as Maya said, at any point ask questions in the box, but we do have time at the end to go through things in more detail. Okay, so like Maya said, I'm going to cancel my camera so you can look at the slides and I won't distract you. So first of all, we're just to look at what is chronic pain. So the International Association for the Study of Pain, this is from 2007, defines chronic pain as pain that exists, either persists beyond the point that healing would be expected to be complete, usually taken as 3 to 6 months, or that occurs in disease processes in which healing does not take place. The pain may be continuous or intermittent. Chronic pain can be experienced by those who do not have evidence of tissue damage or biological reason for pain. And I think this is the key of the whole thing, in that usual healing, and remember the words usual and normal are in the clinical references in terms of if you broke your leg, what is the typical time that it would heal in, for example. So like that, if you hurt your back and the typical recovery time is 3 to 6 months, if the pain can persists beyond that point and perhaps is even increasing, then you're looking at chronic pain. It becomes a beast in its own right. And for many people like myself, there may not actually be a damage in the first place. It may not be an accident or a trauma. It may be very gradual. So the pain may be continuous or intermittent. And many people with chronic pain experience flares in pain and in fatigue. And then they can also go into remission, where there's periods of low or no pain and relatively normal levels of energy. So chronic pain can be experienced by those who do not have evidence of biological or tissue damage, and it may be continuous or intermittent. So what's life like with chronic pain? So first of all, you have the physical sensations and fatigue that's often goes along with the pain. But also there's a substantial increased risk of depression, anxiety, physical deconditioning. So many people will be inactive. Like myself, I was in bed more or less for a few years. So you're looking at muscle wastage, it's stiffness related to that. So that physical deconditioning of not being up and about. The rest of your body, apart from the area that may be damaged or you're experiencing the pain, you may experience pain and wasting of muscle in the rest of your body also. So poor self-esteem, social isolation and relationship breakdown. Many of the people I speak to when I'm doing the self-management talks mention the poor self-esteem, the lack of confidence, and the complete knock to the sense of identity that we have of ourselves, and then adjusting to this role. A lot of people maybe aren't working, so this big shift to, I'm someone now who doesn't work. I'm not that person I used to be. I'm trying to adjust to life in pain. Maybe I was always the person that could help other people out, but at this point in my life, I'm the one who needs the help. So it can be a huge role reversal for a lot of people. And with that, there's the social isolation, especially if you're not working, at the social aspect of work and the financial responsibilities as well. And that can often lead to relationship breakdown. So there's reduced physical function and mobility, which can lead to the loss of independence. And patients may not be diagnosed and treated for social anxieties that may have contributed to or result from their condition. And all the research is there to say that there's comorbidities between depression and chronic pain, anxiety and chronic pain. But often it's quite difficult to get a diagnosis of chronic pain in its own, never mind the psychological side effects, so to speak, or comorbidities that go with that. And we see that too in children and adolescents with chronic pain. They're absent from school more often, so they lose track of their peers. They're participating in fewer sporting activities. They may never reach their full academic or vocational potential. So when we look at this in the younger age population of chronic pain patients, it may seem as a dismal kind of picture to believe that you would never reach your full academic or vocational potential. So as an adult, we tend to forget that there's many years left for us, and we're not just written off because chronic pain has come along. That just as with children and adults, we need to instill hope, and that is the same for adults also. So people with chronic pain often have to cease employment, also adds the financial stresses to the psychological and physical pain. And later on, we're going to look at the cost to a country in terms of chronic pain. But first, we're briefly just going to look at some of the thought processes that come with chronic pain. You're looking at catastrophizing and ruminating, those thoughts of things will never get better, or I'm always in pain. Fear of re-injury, especially as I'm looking out at snow-filled Dublin here, the thought of I couldn't go out and make a snowman or have a snowball fight, because if I slip, then I'm going to break something, then my pain will get worse. So it's this constant weighing up of what can I do, what's not going to increase the pain, what will increase the pain, and then perhaps expectation of a cure. And this, I'm sure Maya is going to touch on this also, in that what do I actually have access to? So what is the ideal situation? What kind of treatments are out there for whatever condition it is that you may have? And there's many conditions nested under chronic pain, whether it be arthritis or fibromyalgia like myself. It could be neuropathic pain, neurological pain. There's all different sort of categories, diseases with pain. And what we're looking at is when those conditions continue between 3 to 6 months or longer, that we're looking at chronic pain. And as I'll mention later, the international classification of diseases is hopefully going to be altered this year to include chronic pain as a disease in its own right. And Chronic Pain Ireland are involved in advocating and encouraging that legislative change on an international level that could happen. So back to the thoughts or patterns of thinking, that expectation of cure can also drain a lot of energy for the patient. And there can be feelings of entitlement, frustration and anger with the system that's out there. And then maybe even self-blame and not a great hope of the future, and social disbelief. And this is a big one of, there's nobody else out there that understands what I'm going through. And I'm the only one with chronic pain. Those feelings that it's only me that's going through this. And when we look now at the figures, unfortunately, it's not cases of isolated cases, should I say. So the numbers of people experiencing chronic pain are quite high across Europe and the world as a whole. And the difficulty is that the number of people experiencing pain, it's very difficult to precisely quantify exactly how many people there are experiencing it. Although research has repeatedly shown that pain is a major health issue, researchers have tended to examine the prevalence of pain in one or two ways. Usually the focus is either on a specific condition, for example, MS or cancer or fibromyalgia or neuropathic pain, or a defined group of people. So people of a certain age group or children or people who live in a certain way. So even with these populations, different studies have arrived at different levels of prevalence of pain. And that is one thing that's very difficult with pain in general, is that if we're all given different scales to measure our pain on, or quality of life, or perceived burdensomeness. But for example, even with pain, my 9 out of 10 out of pain, it could be very different to somebody else's. It's very subjective. So while we are looking at measuring people and measuring how many people have pain, we have to remember that pain means something different to everybody. So one of the largest studies was undertaken in 2006 by Breivik et al. It spanned 15 European countries and also Israel. And the researchers in that study concluded that on average 1 in 5 Europeans suffer from chronic pain. Now that was in 2006. And the estimated direct and indirect healthcare costs for chronic pain disorders associated with that study, it was shown that an EU member or European member states vary between 2 and 3% of their GDP across the EU. So, for example, in 2016, that would have accounted for 441 billion euros annually. So we're looking at costs way and above diabetes, in some countries cancer care, and other major diseases, and it's significant cost across Europe. So moving on then to Ireland, there's some conflicting research out there in terms of just how many people are experiencing it. So in that same study, Breivik et al., they would have said that in the UK and Ireland, it would have been found that chronic pain is a prevalence of around 13%. In that study, they said Northern Ireland would have been 19%. But in a more recent study in 2011, the PRIME study, which was based in the Republic of Ireland, they showed a prevalence of 35%. That's 35% of people who would have recognised, according to the IASP or IACP, all the IAs, the one that we mentioned there on the first page, the IASP, yeah, according to their definition, 35% of Irish people that were studied or responded to the study were experiencing chronic pain. And that has an economic cost which is quite substantial. You're looking at around €6,000 per person per year within the community. If they were in a pain clinic, we're looking at 9,500 per year, and almost 30,000 per year of those percentage, which is 5% of patients that experience the most pain. So even within that 35%, there's a 5% whose needs were greater than the others, which would account for a total economic cost of 4.76 billion per year. And that's from the PRIME study. Separate to that, pain was also the most common disability type reported in our Central Statistics census. In 2008, the National Disability Survey in Ireland showed that pain was one of the most common reported. And that would also tie in with what's happening globally. Definitely in Ireland, we look to Australia in terms of leading the way in treatments and legislation. And they were saying that 1 in 5 Australians would experience chronic pain in their lifetime. So it isn't a country-specific phenomenon. It's in Ireland, the UK, all over the world. But the huge difference in individual countries is how it's treated and the access to services. So chronic pain treatment in Ireland is usually the first port of call is your GP, your general practitioner, who will then refer somebody on to a specialist, whether that may be a rheumatologist or a pain specialist or a neurologist, whatever type of pain may be going on. Now, at the moment in Ireland, for some specialist treatment, there are waiting lists for up to 2 years. So we can see that access to services is vastly delayed. Within the service that is being provided, we have 8 that meet the IASP criteria for multidisciplinary pain clinics. Only 3 of those offer intense care and will be recognised internationally. So there's a huge shortfall in what's available. If you balance that with the 350 million annual disability payments just for back pain alone, you can see that at a legislative and governmental level, the interest is there for the GDP to be reinvested in services for patients. And even in medical training itself, there's a minimum of 4 hours training unless a specialty is taken to go on to look at pain, either as in anesthesiology or as a profession in its own right as a pain specialist. So we're looking at anywhere between 13 to 35% of the Irish population. There's up to 2-year waiting list for some specialist treatments, which are falling behind where the standard should be. And then there's a huge cost to the taxpayer and the country as a whole also. So looking to the future, and I know Maya is going to touch on this, what treatments are out there, what's in development, and how can patients look, especially internationally, at what's happening. And with Chronic Pain Ireland, what we're doing is we're advocating for patients, and we are involved with all the key stakeholders in decision making, both at a governmental and pharmacological, if I could say the word, pharmacological level also. And we are hoping that this, the WHO, the World Health Organization, in their reclassification this year of diseases, are going to recognise chronic pain as a disease in its own right. So in brief, we can see that chronic pain isn't going anywhere, and it's across every country. It affects every aspect of life from many people, and anything that we can do to link people with better services and treatments can only lead to better life quality for people. So Maya, I'm going to pop my camera back on there, and if you want to take over, and as we were saying, if there's any questions anybody has, I know I flew through If you want to save them toward the end or pop them in now, and we can scroll through as we go along. Okay, Maya, I'll
Thank you very much, Deirdre. It was really important to hear all these things, though I know that most of these things people might know them. I think something that we really need to stress is that chronic pain is still not a condition, and actually that's something that I mean it's not a recognized condition, and that's something that you can see in the clinical trials as well. At the beginning of this webinar. At the very beginning, I started speaking about treatments and development, and I did that on purpose. Actually, one of the questions that I usually receive is, okay, where are all the new innovative treatments? Where are the new treatments coming from, and how they're being developed, basically? And the answer to that is through clinical trials. And that's the reason why most of this presentation will be focused on what a clinical trial is, what our rights as patients are, how we can access clinical trials easily, and what are the specifics, how we can benefit, what are also are the risks by being a part of a clinical trial. So once again, because chronic pain is still not a recognized condition, most of the clinical trials are focused on another type of disease, and then chronic pain is just a matter of the eligibility criteria, the criteria that the clinical trials have when inviting volunteers to join this clinical trial. And I will speak more about the specifics of clinical trial for patients with chronic pain a little bit later. But let's first cover what really a clinical trial is. This is actually a process where a new compound is being tested and it has been proved that and it's proved that it's safe and more efficient than everything else out there. There are two main types of clinical trials: interventional and observational. And this is very important for you to know when you choose the clinical trial that you want to participate in, because interventional clinical trials are the ones where you have an actual intervention, either it's some kind of a drug or some kind of an active ingredient, so something that might improve your condition. They're testing this for improving your condition, where observational clinical trials, they're more focused on observing, basically the investigators, the doctors working on the clinical trial, they will just observe what the effects are, but there is no actual intervention. That might be some kind of a behavior therapy or just diagnostics. Observational clinical trials might be very helpful, especially if you're looking for having to be better diagnosed. Where interventional clinical trials are for people that are looking for another type of treatment. They've tested everything out there and it's not working, or they're already resistant to what's out there, and they want to try something new. And the way they can try this something new is by being a part of a clinical trial. And here on this slide, I try to briefly explain the drug development industry overview, so that you know who do you rely to. As being a clinical trial participant, you will be directly speaking with the doctors and nurses working at hospitals conducting these clinical trials. These clinical trials, I mean, in general, this industry is the most regulated industry ever. I will show you in the next slide that basically only the clinical trials take on average 10 years in order for a new treatment to be proved as safe and more efficient than the treatments that are currently approved. And it takes a lot of people, a lot of organization. That's something that's pretty well developed. Clinical trials are being sponsored by the pharmaceutical companies or institutions, governmental institutions like the FDA or the NIH, the National Institute for Health in the United States, and the NIHR, the National Institute for Health Research in the UK, and basically every single country has its own institution and governmental funded clinical trials. These companies and these institutions, they very often work with companies called clinical research organizations, and these organizations are specialized in working with the hospitals and research centers where I mentioned clinical trials are being conducted. If you have more questions, we can go back to this slide. I just wanted to provide you with a brief overview. As I said, clinical trial participants, these are basically the patients. They rely totally on the doctors and nurses who do whatever it takes to make sure that the participants are safe and they feel really well in the clinical trial. And this is the process how a new treatment is being developed. As I mentioned, that's a very long process, and that's actually one of the challenges that patients are facing, especially patients with chronic diseases and chronic pain as well. Because for a new treatment to be discovered and then approved to the market, it takes like 12 and even more years, and not many people can wait that long. And that's one of the main reasons why people join clinical trials. Before actually starting clinical trials, clinical trial is the process that involves people. But before that, there are a lot of testings in the drug discovery and the preclinical phase that make sure that once you start test with people, it's safe enough and you're confident enough to proceed. So these are around the preclinical and drug discovery phase is around 2 to 3 years. As you can see, it starts from testing between 250 to 10,000 compounds. And by the time you are at the stage of having clinical trials with people, you already have only 8 compounds. So you found the most promising ones. And the clinical trials, here it says 6 to 7 years. Actually, it takes longer and longer and longer. It depends on the clinical trial and the number of people that have to be involved in the clinical trials. But they are divided in 3 main phases, and I will go through these phases because this is something that's really important for you to understand when you choose the right clinical trial for yourself and or for your close ones. After the clinical trials, after regulatory review and approval, then the drug is already on the market and can be accessed by anyone else, basically. But you have to know that this approval process depends again on the country institutions, on the regional institutions, which means sometimes the clinical trial might be completed in the States, and then in the States they already have this drug on the market, where in Europe the clinical trials are still ongoing in the latest phase, but this is still not approved, so people cannot go to the pharmacy and buy it. Which might sound strange, but it's just in order to make sure that all the clinical trials are completed according to the regulations, and they really prove the safety and efficiency of the new treatment. So I mentioned that the phases are really important. So as next, I would like to show you a little bit more information about the phases. I'll start with the first one. The first one is the phase where mostly, not every time of course, but mostly joining the first phase of clinical trials are healthy volunteers. Not every time, but these are most of the cases. And these are not that many people. These are healthy volunteers that are between 20 and 100 in terms of numbers of people. And the main focus of this stage, of this phase, is really to make sure that the dosage is safe. The new drug is safe enough so that you can test it on more people and make sure that the new drug is also efficient. The second piece is, I actually forgot to mention that the first phase is usually organized in only one or just a few locations, few hospitals or research centers. Sometimes it's a part of an academic institution or a hospital, a part of a university, for example, because that's where they, for example, found a new compound, a new drug. But with every next phase, there are more and more people involved in the research, and also more and more locations. So this is the case with the second phase. There are several hundreds people that need to participate in this clinical trial. It takes between 3 to 5 years to complete this phase. And then the focus of this phase is to assess the efficacy of the drug. So they already know a lot of information about the safety. Now the efficacy is what the investigators, this is how the doctors are called in the clinical research industry, but basically the doctors, they have to prove that this is the efficacy of the drug or the new device. Up next, we have the third phase of the clinical trial. This is the final phase, although there is another phase called fourth phase. Actually, this is the phase where the final phase, and after this phase, the drug will be already approved on the market. What does this mean? It means that several thousands of patients are involved in this clinical trial in hundreds of locations. We already know that the drug is safe. We know that its efficacy. What we need to establish, or what we need to find out with this phase 3 is how efficient this new drug is, and we also compare it to the standard treatment, to the treatments that are already approved. It doesn't make sense for a new treatment to be released on the market if it's not something better compared to other treatments already on the market. And as you can see, it takes around 5 years. And after that, we have the phase. The fourth phase is already, it's called post-marketing phase, because the drug is already on the market. Basically, it's closely monitored just to make sure that regulators can follow upon like adverse, some kind of side effects, adverse events, and they're closely monitoring the effects of this drug. But this is already something that the doctor can prescribe you, and you can get from the pharmacy as well. And here on this slide, I try to give you some examples of drugs that have been developed exactly through clinical trials. Actually, there is no drug that we know that hasn't been proved in a trial first. The bad news is that most of the drugs that we are currently using, especially for the chronic conditions that we have, are from like 25 years ago. Like they're arguing between 15 and 25 years ago, but it really depends when the compound is being discovered. But as you can see, most of them, here are some like 2005 and 2006, 2008 and 2009. There have been some really great discoveries that help people to survive nowadays. And that was possible only through clinical trials. I will give you another example with a clinical trial that was more recent. Actually, Humira is one of the drugs that was is produced by AbbVie, it's a pharmaceutical company, and it took them like 20 years from the discovery to that point where Humira is one of the first biological drugs that provided real results on people having arthritis. Now, because they want to prove that this is working also on people having psoriatic arthritis, they run additional clinical trials. So for every new condition they want to prove that it's working, they have to have additional clinical trial. But it's already proving that it's working. So the good news is that the people having these conditions, if they know about the existence of this clinical trial, they can join and access this drug before it's even on the market. The question, how can patients access clinical trials? That's something that very often patients coming to FindMeCure, and not only people that I meet are asking me. Well, the most often case is through your doctor. That's the best way, if I have to be honest, to really access the clinical trial through your doctor, because Your doctor will know your condition, and he will be the one to really advise you on what's best to do in your particular case. The bad news is that not every doctor is aware of what kind of clinical trials there are. Usually, the people that receive information through their doctors about the clinical trial, these people are going to doctors that are already involved in clinical trials, that are already researchers or investigators, as I said, called. So the other bad news is that only 10% of doctors worldwide are also investigators. So the rest might be somehow involved, or might be some kind of might be some kind of aware of clinical trials, but it's really a matter of luck whether you're visiting such a doctor or not. The other way is really through your hospital. If they're already running clinical trials, they might inform you in one way or another that there are clinical trials running in this hospital. And also nowadays, it's more and more, it's easier basically to find information online through clinical trial platforms like clinicaltrials.gov, Clinical Trials Register EU. The last one is the European Register for Clinical Trials. The difficulty of accessing clinical trials is, once again, as I said, you have to be you have to visit doctors and hospitals where they are aware of these clinical trials, or they are involved somehow in clinical trials. On top of that, the governmental clinical trial websites that I mentioned are really too complicated because they provide you with publicly available clinical trial information, but this information is actually provided for other purposes. They're not created for patients. They're in a medical language that is very hard to understand, and sometimes it's hard to assess whether this clinical trial might be good for you or not. We've estimated that if you go through the governmental clinical trial website, it will take you on average 3 months to get in contact with the right clinical trial team and receive more information about the clinical trial. On top of that, there are some specifics coming with the clinical trial, like, for example, eligibility criteria. Yes, I understand that eligibility criteria might prevent you of being a part of a clinical trial, even though you want a lot. But the reality is that eligibility criteria are there for our safety. They make sure that the people that are fit, that the clinical trial is fit for them, and the patients that are fit for this clinical trial, they get together. Because otherwise, the data that investigators will receive might be biased. On the other side, this might not be of help for you. So eligibility, understanding eligibility criteria of the clinical trial is something very important for you. And of course, there are different requirements. I will speak more about that in a bit, but there are really too many. And another way of having access to a clinical trial might be other platforms. There are already some platforms that are created for patients access clinical trials easier. FindMeCure is an example like that, and I used an example from our internal slides of what does it mean to access a clinical trial from our platform. These are 5 steps. I will quickly go through them, and then I will show you. I will provide a demo of that. So once patients come to our website, I'll show you how this looks like. Our website has all available clinical trials worldwide. And you can see a list of all the relevant clinical trials once you enter some kind of information about you and your condition. The next step is to really review this list of clinical trials. All these clinical trials, the list of clinical trials is actually rated so that you can see the most relevant ones on the top. So once you use clinical trials, you can apply for them and show your interest in finding out more about these clinical trials. Our team is specialized in working with patients with various conditions, and we can make sure that you understand the eligibility criteria and you fit these eligibility criteria to this particular clinical trial. And if you fit this eligibility criteria, then the next step is for us to introduce you to the medical team of the clinical trial, to the research center, and make sure that you receive all the information coming with the clinical trial, and to be further screened, and to have the choice of and decide to participate in a clinical trial. And because I want to show you how this looks like, just give me a second, I'll show you my screen. So as I said, Chronic Pain Ireland is one of our partner organizations, and I will show you their screen because we recently started partnership on helping their members to access information about clinical trials. So that's their website. If you go to Getting Help, then give me a second to minimize this. Okay. Then you have future clinical trials treatments. And then here you have the search box. If you enter a condition, let's say rheumatoid arthritis. Okay. And let's say 31, and then female. Then you open up the FindMeCure search engine, the FindMeCure platform. It takes a while, but because I entered Ireland, now you can see 2 clinical trials happening now in Ireland that are looking for participants that are 31 years old and have rheumatoid arthritis. If you see below, you can see that there are a lot more filters that you can use. Here you can also select the phase, but you can see here that there are only 2 clinical trials in phase 3. And we can open up. Let's see the first one. Okay, then it opens up a page that is explaining more about the particular clinical trial. It says that it's a clinical trial for people having rheumatoid arthritis and that are over 18 years old. And it also explains here that this is in the final phase before the treatment is being released on the market. You have here direct access to all the locations where this clinical trial is happening. So you can also review the purpose and also to the provided treatment. This information provides you with, this case here provides you with information, what is the purpose of this treatment, what's being tested, and what are the included treatments. You can see that here there are different drugs. It's because the patients that will be included in the clinical trial will be divided into different groups, and the efficiency will be compared basically. And I'll explain why a little bit later. Here, you can see all the locations near you. Because I'm now in Bulgaria, it detects that I'm in Bulgaria, so I can see the locations in Bulgaria. But if you go to other locations, sorry, you can see other locations. Here you can see that there are many locations worldwide, one in Ireland. It's not yet recruiting, but if you still want to participate, you can click there, enter your name, your email address, your number, and then let's say chronic pain if that's something specific for your condition, and then accept the terms and then proceed. I'm happy with my voice. So once you do this application, you will receive information from FindMeCure. We will contact you and we'll connect you to the clinical trial staff once we make sure that you are eligible for this clinical trial. And actually, you can see the eligibility criteria by yourself. When I will open the very same clinical trial once again, when you go to the bottom, you have the option of view eligibility criteria. As I said, these eligibility criteria might be very complicated. So our medical team is here to walk you through these requirements and make sure that you understand all of them. Of course, your doctor is also a great source of information. You can go back to your doctor and discuss this with him or her. And if you want later, we can go through other examples. As I said, you can go here and enter other conditions. Unfortunately, with chronic pain, I will show you, you can go with chronic pain, but usually chronic pain is related to other conditions. That's how clinical trials are mostly being conducted now. And I'll speak more about the specifics now. I'll just recall my presentation again. I'm sharing. Okay. Let me go back to the slide. Yes, just briefly, once you go to the hospital to find out more information, that's called screening visit, because the doctors or the research nurses will run additional examinations to make sure that you are eligible for the clinical trial. And of course, you have to sign off an informed consent. This is the document when saying that you're okay with having your examinations and being evaluated for participation for this clinical trial. The informed consent is very, very important document, because this is where everything's being described, everything within the clinical trial, all the details. And usually these informed consents are written so that patients can understand that. But if you don't understand something, the doctors and the research nurses are there so that they can explain to you. And you can take the informed consent with you at home and then go back as many times as you need, so that you can fully understand what the requirements are, what the schedule of this clinical trial is. Let's say they ask you to go to the hospital twice a week or once every month, for how many hours, for example, what would be the procedure, and if you, let's say, don't feel well, who you should contact, etc., etc. And then once you sign off the informed consent, again, you can review your rights, and I will discuss, I will review your rights as a patient as well. Then you will be randomized in the so-called control groups, where you will either receive an active treatment, the new treatment, or a placebo. Where placebo here is very important for you to understand that placebo might not be just the sugar pill. It might be just a standard treatment, especially in cases like cancer, where people need some kind of a treatment. No one will provide you with just a sugar pill. If there is a standard treatment already approved, then they will provide you with this standard treatment. Everything, once again, is described in the informed consent. So you will know what your chances are of getting a placebo, what kind of placebo this is, and what kind of active treatment there will be. Most likely, if you decide to be a part of this clinical trial, once you're randomized, most likely you won't know whether you are a part of the active treatment or a placebo. Your doctor will know. And actually, one of the biggest advantages of clinical trials is that the medical team taking care of you are really professionals, and their main focus is on making sure that you feel well and really safe with the whole clinical trial and with the treatment. So specifics for chronic pain clinical trials. I told you that I will cover this in one of my slides. The specifics is that the current clinical trials are focused on replacing the addictive painkillers, because that was the huge one that most patients were facing in the last couple of years. Because yes, there are painkillers, but first you might get addicted to them. And many people using painkillers for many years, they become resistant to them. They just stop working to them. So they need something new. And the treatments, the clinical trials, I'm sorry, are now focused on treatments that are to replace the addictive painkillers. Another specific is, once again, that chronic pain is still not a recognized condition. So if you are looking for a chronic pain clinical trial, I will encourage you to write down a diagnosis that you have, a diagnosis that you relate this chronic pain to, because it would be, you have a lot of higher chances of getting into a trial than if you just go for a chronic pain. And the chances, the reason for that is because also the treatments focused on, the clinical trials focused on other conditions are also trying to find a way to cure these these conditions. And information about that you can receive in the informed consent. What kind of treatment this is, what's the goal of this treatment, whether it's just supportive, whether it's just for curing your symptoms or for something different. Also, it's important to know how the clinical trial results are being measured for chronic pain clinical trials. There are 6 core domains. These are pain intensity, physical functioning, emotional functioning, participant ratings of improvement and satisfaction, symptoms and adverse events, and participant disposition, basically adherence to the treatment. These are the 6 core domains that the doctors will follow up during the clinical trial to make sure that a new treatment works or doesn't work. And these are the things that you can also follow up with your progress in order to know how you feel and whether this is something that's improving you or not. I will encourage you though, if you are a part of a clinical trial, just give it more time, because very often it takes a while, especially with chronic pain, to get the actual positive effect. And if you have more questions about that, I can go back to this slide again. Compensation on clinical trials. First of all, clinical trials are free for participation. So besides having a very specialized medical team and very professional one, and people that are taking care of your emotional attitude and not attitude but feeling and physical situation. Besides that, there are 2 main types of compensation. If you are a healthy volunteer, there might be like a certain compensation for your participation. Sometimes there is a compensation for people having the condition, but that's very rarely the case because the regulations prevent that. And there is also a compensation on harm suffered, which is actually an insurance. This type of compensation is described again in the informed consent. And this is only if there is additional risk associated with the new treatment. Sometimes these treatments, like I gave you an example with Humira, the drug used for people having rheumatoid arthritis, now being tested on other conditions. If they know that this treatment has already proved to be safe and there are not actual, like real serious adverse events that should be expected, then the regulatory bodies might think that there is no additional risk with this treatment, so there shouldn't be any additional insurance. But if there is, everything will be described in the informed consent. The compensation depends a lot on the country legislations. As I said, clinical trials are the most regulated area, and also in each and every country there are different institutions like the Ministry of Health and different working groups, but also ethics committees within different hospitals, and they are the ones to really like provide these legislations and say whether people should be compensated or not, and how. And really quickly, because we are running out of time, your rights as a patient, being a part of a clinical trial, you can quit at any time. You can sign up the informed consent, and tomorrow, if you're not happy with that, you can quit. You can quit without even giving any reason. So that's something that you should know. You will be reimbursed for your travel expenses, or if accommodation is also included. Anything related, everything related to the treatment or to the clinical trial is included. There are some exceptions, but very, very rarely. And also, you can get a free or discounted access to the treatment even after the study has been completed. Actually, there was a very interesting case where with a patient, it actually was a 2-year-old girl having spinal muscular atrophy. And because of her, I followed a particular clinical trial for patients having this rare condition. The people who were a part of this clinical trial, after the treatment was approved, it was actually the first treatment ever for such condition. These participants received this treatment absolutely for free. Otherwise, I know from this girl, because she wasn't a part of this clinical trial, it cost them like, I think it was like $10,000 per year for the first year, and then a couple of $1,000 in the next years, and that's for the rest of her life, basically. So sometimes that's a good way to have free access or discounted access to the treatment. Benefits I already mentioned: free treatment, better healthcare service because people are really specialized in this area. Some of the best doctors are involved with clinical trials. Close monitoring to your condition and improvement, access to innovative treatments, and also it's on the last, it's last on my list, but it's actually very important that by being a part of a clinical trial, you also contribute to the science and to new innovative treatments being available to other people. So with that, I really would like to have a look on your questions. I tried to cover most of the important topics within what clinical trial is and within our webinar, webinar topic. I know that there are many things that we can discuss further, but my ask to you is really to have a thought later on or even now, and let me know what are the areas that you want to learn more about. What are the things that you feel that might be more helpful to you down the road? And let's really have other webinars together and focus on the things that matter the most to you. So with that, I will really look at the chat. The first question that I see, I'm sorry, it's on the bottom, but still it's from Glenn. She is asking, so Glenn's asking whether she has psoriatic arthritis, whether she can apply. Yes, you can. And let me close my presentation and share my desktop again. And I'll show you that you can see psoriatic arthritis here as well. So that's a very good question. By having all clinical trials available right, on FindMeCure, we have all the conditions that are being tested. So it's not only for chronic pain, there is cancer, there is also, can you see my screen now? I think so, yeah. So psoriatic arthritis. Okay, you can here enter your data, your details, and then you will see the list in Ireland. Let's see whether there are any clinical trials. Yeah, there are 4 now, and all of them are in the final stage. So you can review them later, Glenn, and let me know if you need any help. Something that I didn't mention is that what if there is no clinical trial in Ireland? Well, that might be the case because in Ireland there are not that many clinical trials. You can see other locations. Let's say you can see in the United Kingdom, and there might be more clinical trials there. The difficulty in joining a clinical trial that is outside of your country is that usually hospitals running clinical trials, they also require to know your healthcare status. And sometimes they require for you to be insured in the country where the clinical trial is being conducted. That's not always the case. So you're welcome to try and apply for a different clinical trial, and we can ask the hospital whether they're okay to have a patient from outside of the country. But what's specific for the United Kingdom specifically is that they also require a referral letter from your doctor. And there is actually a system in place where these doctors can automatically produce these referral letters to the research centers. So that might be a challenge for someone outside of the United Kingdom to apply for a clinical trial and join this clinical trial. What you can do as well is if a clinical trial is being conducted somewhere else, and it's especially in the first or second phase, you can always create an account here on FindMeCure and follow up the progress of the clinical trial that is still in the earlier stage. And when a new clinical trial in Ireland starts, then you will receive a notification and we'll let you know that you can apply for this clinical trial.
Maya, might jump in there for 1 second if you can hear me okay there.
Absolutely.
Yes, I think it's one thing that you touched on and maybe might need to be stressed is that it's not always a clinical trial in relation to medication. Sometimes it's a device, or sometimes it's a psychological treatment that they're trying in terms of how do you cope, different things around you. It isn't always necessarily a drug. I think that's important to point out.
That's very true, Deirdre. Yes, it might be drug, it might be medical device, it might be some kind of a therapy. Actually, if you can still see my screen, I hope so, you can actually choose the type of treatment that you prefer and check whether there is such.
And I can see this. I think your screen is, it's gone back to the main screen again there, Maya. You might want to mirror your desktop again. I can see there's a few questions there. There's one addressed to myself and about, how to cope with side effects. There's another there about the support groups and things like that. I suppose it's important to note that this is the first in hopefully a series of webinars in relation to accessing treatments. And in this one, we're really focusing on what is a clinical trial, what is chronic pain, and how can the two come together, and what services are available in relation to that. I know for myself and most people with chronic pain and all the related conditions, it's a variety of techniques, self-management, pacing, medication, but also continuing to re-educate yourself on what's out there, what treatments are available, what's happening in other parts of the world. As one person commented there in relation to Versatis, it's always good to know what's happening in other countries to see if it's acceptable here as well, or should it be available. So when it comes to treatment, it's never a full stop. They're always working on something. So it's great to be able to link in with yourself, Maya, and the FindMeCure, just to have a worldview, even just to keep track of what's happening.
Yeah, I also wanted to add something, Deirdre, here, that I understand that even though we try to make the information more understandable on our website, sometimes it's the case that you can't understand what's really written, how it relates to you. So please just ask us. There is a chat there. You can use the contact form. Come back to us and let us know what you really need in terms of information, and we'll make sure to help you in one way or another. Even like helping you with finding out who is behind a certain clinical trial, like a professor or a doctor. I'm happy to help you in any way I can. This is, by the way, because I think that because of the last sharing, the program stopped working. So now I can't really do anything with my screen. So is it possible for you to read loud if there are other questions, because I can't see them?
Yes, of course. I think I touched on it there. I know Kevin Ford, he was asking about Versatis in Ireland. It's been quite a big, not controversy, but it has been in the media a lot recently in terms of a drug that's licensed for one purpose but is being widely prescribed for another. And Kevin was wondering if that's the case in Bulgaria as well. And before you want to answer that, I might just say that, Kevin, that I know the issue around this definitely is a particular drug that's licensed only for one particular disease or one condition, post-herpetic neuralgia. And Maya did mention when she was explaining about clinical trials that if something comes up during the trial as a positive, as a benefit, that it's also working for something else, they have to start and run a new trial to try that. So that's why often drugs are only licensed for one particular thing, because they would have to go back to the start of the trial process to try it for something else as well. So I'll hand over to you, Maya, there again. Sorry, just to say about that. If Versatis is being prescribed for chronic pain in Bulgaria, if you know that.
I'm not that aware what's happening in Bulgaria because I'm mostly working in the UK. But generally speaking, drugs have to be prescribed for the things that for the conditions that they have been approved for working. If you want to double check what were the results from a particular clinical trial, on FindMeCure you can also access the completed clinical trials. We have all the information there. You just have to, unfortunately, I can't share my screen anymore. But if you go to the filter, if you unclick open clinical trials, which means looking for recruiting clinical trials, basically, then you will see all the clinical trials, even the completed ones. And then, or you can also enter in the search box the name of the drug, and it will provide you with information about clinical trials from this drug, if there is such information. That might help you to see for which conditions this drug has been approved, which conditions this drug has been approved for, and that might provide you with additional information. But be aware that sometimes, once again, some drugs are approved for a couple of things in one region and other things in another region. It really depends on the clinical trial in the specific region. Sometimes you don't have access to this drug. That's very often the case, and I hate that, but that's the reality that, especially pharmaceutical companies, let's say they release a particular drug in one market where this drug might be promising for all the patients having this condition, but because of, let's say, the government doesn't approve it, this drug is not accessible in another country, which leaves these patients without having access to this drug. This is also the case.
I think that's quite clear, Maya. Thanks for that. I can direct two of the other questions maybe to yourself in general queries about trials. There was the most recent one there from Dawn McManus is she's finding it very interesting. She's just wondering, are some of the trials state funded, or is it generally just private pharmaceutical companies that are running trials?
Yeah, both basically. A huge percentage of the clinical trials are funded by the government. By one or more governments. It really depends. However, this information is also provided in the clinical trial. Once you see the clinical trial card, basically, as I showed you already, there is a list of clinical trials, and on each and every clinical trial, there is information who is sponsoring the clinical trial. Is it a university? Is it a pharmaceutical company? Is it some kind of government?
Okay, I just opened your presentation again there for you, Maya. You might be able to access it. So that's clear then, it's a real mix of different sources.
Exactly. What I think is more important really is the phase of the clinical trial. Because as I explained, I hope it was clear enough, but actually the phase also explains how advanced the treatment might be. Though there are exceptions. Sometimes the clinical trial doesn't have even a phase. Sometimes there are phases like mixture of phases, like you will see phase 2 and 3 all together because they're running tests on efficacy all together. But that speaks a lot about the progress of the clinical trial. And I think that that's even more important than knowing who is sponsoring the clinical trial, because in the end of the day, all the parties sponsoring clinical trials are really like either big corporations or companies with a really big structure or governments. And in the end of the day, they all want to solve the problem in finding a new treatment in one way or another.
Yeah. So it can depend on the stage as well. Yeah.
Yes, the stage is very important. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So one of the other questions, and my feeling is maybe it would depend on the specific trial, but Alison Hawkins is asking, she mentions that, excuse me, she suffers from ME, fibromyalgia, and peripheral nerve hyperexcitability, if I'm saying that right, and is on multiple medications. So if she was to participate in the trial, would she have to come off her current medications?
It might be the case, but it might not be. It really depends on the clinical trial. In the eligibility criteria, this is where you can find out information whether what kind of medications you were supposed to have prior joining the clinical trial. And some of the clinical trials might want you to take these drugs during the clinical trial. Others might want you to stop taking these drugs. It really depends on the structure of the clinical trial. My suggestion to you would be to really have a look on the eligibility criteria. I think what would be more complicated for your case, Alison, is that you have several conditions. And this is usually a case where they might exclude you from participation, because sometimes they have conditions that are excluded. If you have a certain condition with another one, that might be such a case. Not always the case, but this is also something that you can find on the eligibility criteria, and also something that you can discuss with our team.
Okay.
One way or another.
Yeah, I think that was quite clear, Maya. I mean, we all have hopes of being able to go on a trial, but there are specific limitations for reasons, so that they can clearly say whether something works or not for a particular condition. So while it's frustrating that it may eliminate us, it will mean that the results are clearer from the trial, I guess.
Absolutely. I think that what most patients are sharing with us is that what they mostly like about being a part of a clinical trial is exactly this close monitoring, because basically you have access to their support 24 hours every day.
Oh, wow.
And on top of that, yes, absolutely. And if you don't feel well, then they're always for you, and their job is basically
I think we're coming to the end of some of the questions anyhow. Let me just see, I'll just refresh here just to make sure that we spoke what Don McManus's question was there.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think that at the very beginning there was a question about whether there are any support groups in Liverpool.
There is. That's also from Alison. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
So it says, do we know of any support groups in Liverpool? And I mean, I can see later the question in terms of multi-condition health conditions was from Alison also, in that she has ME, fibro, and the peripheral nerve condition there as well. So just from personal experience, I can see that there are national advocacy groups for some of the conditions in terms of fibro or ME, and that would be worth checking out. And then from there, they would best be able to direct towards services like support groups in a particular area like Liverpool. What do you think about that, Maya?
Yeah, absolutely. We're also part of international lines of patient organizations, and
Mm-hmm.
Deirdre, you as well. And you know that there are like hundreds of different patient organizations, and they're always happy to help people to find the most relevant support group. I don't know whether there's this in Liverpool, but what I can do is really ask. We uh, ask our partners for that, for this information. What I would also do and encourage to do is, once again, chronic pain is a very subjective condition, and it might come with another condition that you might have. So it might worth checking out for support groups in the diagnosis that you already have, because then you can find other people having the same experience like you do, Alison.
Okay, so we're up to date, so Maya, on the questions. That's everything that's come through so far.
Well, thank you very much, Deirdre, for helping me out. I'm still
No
my
problem.
screen is still stuck, but I hope that we managed to answer some of your questions. Of course, we're always I'm always welcoming more questions. You can contact us through FindMeCure.com, through Chronic Pain Ireland, or just write me a message on my email address, which is Maya, like my name, at FindMeCure.com. I hope that this webinar answered some of your questions around where the new treatments in development are, what this drug development really looks like, what are the specifics, what are my rights. I know we don't have a lot of time, and actually we are 30 minutes ahead of, actually with 30 minutes late, but we really try to explain like in details how this works. Deirdre, thank you so much for joining us and providing with your presentation. And thank you everyone for joining us.
Yes, thanks everybody, and I can see some thanks are coming in there as well. So it was great coordinating with FindMeCure again, Maya, and thanks for your informative talk there. It was really interesting.
I was delighted. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the day, everyone.
You too. Okay, bye now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.